Long, long ago, when winter's snowflakes fell like feathers from heaven, a beautiful queen stopped at a red rose that had magically grown in the dead of winter. As she reached for the rose, its thorns had pricked her finger, 3 droplets of blood falling onto the snow. The red on the white looked so beautiful that she thought, if only I had a child with hair as white as snow and lips as red as blood. Soon afterward, she had a little daughter with hair as white as snow and lips as red as blood. She called her little Snow White. Now the queen was the most beautiful woman in all the land, and very proud of her beauty. She had a mirror which she stood in front of every morning and asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who in this land is fairest of all?" And the mirror always said, "You, my queen, are fairest of all." And then she knew for certain that no one in the world was more beautiful than she. Now Snow White grew up, and when she was 17 years old, she was so beautiful that she surpassed even the queen herself. Now when the queen asked her mirror, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who in this land is fairest of all?" the mirror said, "You, my queen, are fair, it is true. But little Snow White is still 1,000 times fairer than you." When the queen heard the mirror say this, she became enraged with jealousy, and from that hour on, she hated Snow White. Whenever she looked at her, she thought that Snow White was to blame that she was no longer the most beautiful woman in the world. This turned her heart around. Her jealousy gave her no peace. Finally, she summoned her most trusted knight and said to him, "Take Snow White out into the woods to a remote spot and stab her to death. As proof that she is dead, bring her heart and liver back to me. I shall cook them with salt and eat them." The knight took Snow White into the woods. When he took out his sword to kill her, she began to cry and begged fervently that he might spare her life, promising to run away into the woods and never return. The queen's knight took pity on her because she was so beautiful, and he thought, the wild animals will soon devour her anyway. I'm glad that I don't have to kill her. Just then a young boar came running by. He killed it, cut out its heart and liver, and took them back to the queen as proof of Snow White's death. She cooked them with salt and ate them, supposing that she had eaten Snow White's heart and liver. Snow White was now all alone in the great forest. She was terribly afraid and began to run. She ran over sharp stones and through thorns the entire day. Finally, just as the sun was about to set, she came to a little house. The house belonged to 7 dwarfs. They were working in a mine and not at home. Snow White went inside and found everything to be small but neat and orderly. There was a little table with 7 little plates, 7 little spoons, 7 little knives and forks, 7 little mugs, and against the wall there were 7 little beds, all freshly made. Snow White was hungry and thirsty, so she ate a few vegetables and a little bread from each little plate, and from each little glass she drank a drop of wine. Because she was so tired, she wanted to lie down and go to sleep. She tried each of the 7 little beds, one after the other, but none felt right until she came to the 7th one, and she lay down in it and fell asleep. When night came, the 7 dwarfs returned home from the work. They lit their 7 little candles and saw that someone had been in their house. The first one said, "Who has been sitting in my chair?" The second one, "Who has been eating from my plate?" The third one, "Who has been eating my bread?" The fourth one, "Who has been eating my vegetables?" The fifth one, "Who has been sticking with my fork?" The sixth one, "Who has been cutting with my knife?" The 7th one, "Who has been drinking from my mug?" Then the first one said, "Who stepped on my bed?" The second one, "And someone has been lying in my bed." And so forth until the 7th one, and when he looked at his bed, he found Snow White lying there, fast asleep. The 7 dwarfs all came running, and they cried out with amazement. They fetched their 7 candles and looked at Snow White. "Good heaven! Good heaven!" they cried. "She is so beautiful." They liked her very much. They did not wake her up, but let her lie there in the bed. When Snow White woke up, they asked her who she was and how she had found her way to their house. She told them how her mother had tried to kill her, how the Queen's knight had spared her life, how she had run the entire day, finally coming to their house. The dwarves pitied her and said, "If you will keep house for us, and cook, sew, make beds, wash and knit, and keep everything clean and orderly, then you can stay here, and you'll have everything that you want. We come home in the evening, and supper must be ready by then, but we spend the days digging for gold in the mine. You will be alone then. Watch out for the Queen, and do not let anyone in." Snow White agreed. Meanwhile, the Queen thought that she was again the most beautiful woman in the land, and the next morning she stepped before the mirror and asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who in this land is fairest of all?" The mirror answered once again, "You, my Queen, are fair, it is true, but Snow White beyond the 7 mountains is 1,000 times fairer than you." It startled the Queen to hear this, and she knew that she had been deceived, that her most trusted knight had not killed Snow White. Because only the 7 dwarfs lived in the 7 mountains, she knew at once that they must have rescued her. She began to plan immediately how she might kill her, because she would have no peace until the mirror once again said that she was the most beautiful woman in the land. At last, she thought of something clever to do. With dark magic, she disguised herself as an old peddler woman so that no one would recognize her, and went to the dwarf's house. Knocking on the door, she called out, "Open up! Open up! I am the old peddler woman with good wares for sale." Snow White peered out the window and said, "I am not allowed to let anyone in." The old hag pulled out a comb, and when Snow White saw how it glistened, and noted that the woman was a complete stranger, she opened the door and bought the comb from her. "Come, let me comb your hair," said the peddler woman. She had barely stuck the comb into Snow White's hair before the girl fell down and was dead. "That will keep you lying there," said the Queen, and she went home with a light heart. The dwarves came home just in time. They saw what had happened and pulled the poisoned comb from her hair. Snow White opened her eyes and came back to life. She promised the dwarves not to let anyone in again. The Queen stepped before her mirror. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who in this land is fairest of all?" The mirror answered, "You, my Queen, are fair, it is true, but still Snow White, with the 7 dwarfs, is 1,000 times fairer than you." When the Queen heard this, she shook and trembled with anger. "Snow White will die, if it costs me my life." Then she went into her most secret room. No one else was allowed inside, and she made a poisoned apple. From the outside, it was red and beautiful, and anyone who saw it would want it. Then she disguised herself as a peasant woman, went to the dwarf's house, and knocked on the door. Snow White peeped out and said, "I'm not allowed to let anyone in. The dwarves have forbidden it most severely." "If you don't want to, I can't force you," said the peasant woman. "I am selling these apples, and I will give you one to taste." "No, I can't accept anything." "The dwarves don't want me to," said Snow White. "If you are afraid, then I will cut the apple in 2 and eat half of it. Here, you eat the half with the beautiful red cheek." Now the apple had been so artfully made that only the red half was poisoned. When Snow White saw that the peasant woman was eating part of the apple, her desire for it grew stronger, so she finally let the woman hand her the other half through the window. She bit into it, but she barely had the bite in her mouth when she fell to the ground dead. The Queen was happy, went home, and asked her mirror, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who in this land is fairest of all?" And it answered, "You, my Queen, are fairest of all." "Now I'll have some peace," she said, "because once again I'm the most beautiful woman in the land. Snow White will remain dead this time." That evening the dwarfs returned home from the mines. Snow White was lying on the floor, and she was dead. They loosened her laces and looked in her hair for something poisonous, but nothing helped. They could not bring her back to life. They laid her on a bier, and all 7 sat next to her, and cried for 3 days. They were going to bury her, but they saw that she remained fresh. She did not look at all like a dead person, and saw that the blood was still red in her lips. They had a glass coffin made for her and laid her inside so that she could be seen easily. They wrote her name and her ancestry on it in gold letters, and one of them always stayed at home and kept watch over her. Snow White lay there in the coffin a long time and did not decay, but laid there as if she were asleep. One day, a young prince came to the dwarf's house and wanted shelter for the night. When he came into their parlor and saw Snow White lying there in a glass coffin, illuminated so beautifully by 7 little candles, he could not get enough of her beauty. He read the golden inscription and saw that she was the daughter of a king. He asked the dwarves to sell him the coffin with the dead Snow White, but they would not do this for any amount of gold. Then he asked them to give her to him, for he could not live without being able to see her, and he would keep her and honor her as his most cherished thing on earth. Then the dwarves took pity on him and gave him the coffin. The prince had it carried to his castle and had it placed in a room where he sat by it the whole day, never taking his eyes from it. Whenever he had to go out and was unable to see Snow White, he became sad, and he could not eat a bite unless the coffin was laying next to him. Now, the servants who always had to carry the coffin to and fro became angry about this. Finally, one of them opened the coffin, lifted Snow White upright, and said, "We are plagued the whole day long just because of such a dead girl," and he hit her in the back with his hand. Then the terrible piece of apple that she had bitten off came out of her throat, and Snow White came back to life. Grateful for never leaving her side, she walked up to the prince and kissed him on the cheek. The prince was beside himself with joy to feel his beloved Snow White alive in his arms. They sat down that evening together at the table and ate with joy. Their wedding was set for the next day, and Snow White's godless mother was invited as well. That morning, she stepped before the mirror and said, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who in this land is fairest of all?" The mirror answered, "You, my queen, are fair, it is true, but the young queen is 1,000 times fairer than you." She was horrified to hear this and decided one more time to try and kill Snow White for good. This time, disguised as a sweet old wise woman of the court, she went to the wedding to see the young queen for herself. When she arrived, she saw that it was indeed Snow White. She bowed before the new queen and presented her with a special gift for her wedding night. Snow White, knowing the old wise woman was actually her mother in disguise, ordered the guards to seize her. "Not before I give you your gift, mother," she said. The evil queen was shocked. The king had a pair of iron shoes put into the fire until they glowed. He then ordered Snow White's mother to put them on and dance and dance and dance in them until she had finally dropped dead. From then on, Queen Snow White and the king lived happily ever after.